Welcome to the launch of the Brooklyn Law School Women's Leadership Network. Now, at the outset, permit me the privilege of some personal comments about the social and legal context which the network arises in tonight and tonight's event takes place in. I say to every woman here tonight, many people respect you, admire you, appreciate your talent and effort, and embrace your success. Many people support you, encourage, defend you, and wisely know that they need you. Many people understand and believe that discrimination, exploitation, harassment, and violence in all of its forms is abnormal, and that those who must use positions of privilege and power to take advantage of others are in fact pathetic deviants. Now finally, I assure you that Mrs. Allard, my mother, did not raise naive children. Yet I believe and know that the national conversation we're all now engaged in can, if it's sustained by all of us here, denormalize abhorrent behavior. You all know what I'm talking about. Now, having read recently, for example, about the great actress Maureen O'Hara's accounts of how she was punished and penalized in the 1940s for refusing to go along with the notorious casting couch practices, I realize how stubborn and entrenched bad behavior can be. But we will and can do better, so let's. Okay, you agree with that or not? It doesn't count. That was charity applause, okay? Let's get to the main event. It doesn't count. All right. So this women's network, led by the Women's Leadership Circle, whose members are seated beside me, is an initiative that brings together distinguished graduates of the law school, including judges, corporate leaders, partners and associates to leading law firms, entrepreneurs, and those in public service and nonprofits to help us develop and offer programs and opportunities designed to support and mentor women in the law, facilitate networking, and promote career success. From our law school's very beginning, more than 116 years ago, we've admitted women students. We're one of the few law schools to do so at the time, way back when. These women went on to be pioneers in the law, public service, civil rights, politics, business, and government. And just a few who I'm sure many of you will recognize their names, but it's really worth remembering. Rosalie Gardner Jones, class of 1906, which was a major leader in the women's right to vote, the suffrage movement. Jeanette Brill, class of 1908, went on to found the Brooklyn Women's Bar Association, became a judge of the Magistrate and Domestic Relations Courts. Among African-American women in law, Florence Lucas, class of 1938, was an important pioneer. As an appointee in Governor Nelson Rockefeller's administration, she helped draft a new human rights law for New York and developed the hearing process for violations of the law. Mary Johnson Lowe, class of 1954, judge of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, was the second African-American woman appointed to the federal judiciary. She also served as an executive board member of the Brooklyn Law Review in 1952. 2 years ago, Harvard Law Review celebrated their first black woman appointed. What took them so long? Okay. Dorothy Chin Brand of the class of 1974 is the first Asian American woman judge in New York and the state's first elected Asian American public official. And Rachel Fryer, class of 05, judge of the Civil Court of the City of New York, who just last year was the nation's first Hasidic woman elected to public office anywhere in the United States, not just to the bench. And these are just a small sample of the leading women who have been students here, distinguished graduates, and also the incredible women on our faculty. In fact, each of you in this room today are a part of our rich history of graduating successful and accomplished women. You've succeeded, and you're well on your way in your respective industries, and you bring a wealth of information and experience to this room. We're all thrilled that we're launching this network to pay tribute to our past and to recognize our current and our future women leaders. We continue to be trailblazers and set the standard for powerful and accomplished women leaders across all industries. Today, in our law school, women outnumber men 52 to 48% among our current students. And that's actually the case in most law schools across the country. The Women's Leadership Network is a terrific initiative for leveraging the considerable experience and influence of our women graduates to support advanced careers for our students and other alumni of our law school. Now, I'm happy to introduce to you the members of our Women's Leadership Circle, who are we're incredibly grateful for their guidance, counsel, and expertise in helping us launch and continue the activities of this network. So we've got Debbie Epstein Henry, 94, chair of the Brooklyn Law School Women's Leadership Circle, founder, DEH Consulting, Speaking, Writing, and co-founder of Bliss Lawyers. And her parents, Stanley and Sylvia, are here, right there. I'm sure that Debbie knows what cavelling means. That's what they're doing right now. Mika Bondi, 94, Senior Vice President, Legal Affairs, HBO. Mika. Anne-Marie Bowler, Ardiot, founding partner, Gabay Rafi Bowler, LLP. Colleen Caden, 99, partner, Pryor Cashman, LLP. Denise Valtacek, Ardiot, Executive Vice President, General Counsel, Chief Compliance Officer, the Hain Celestial Group. The one, the only, Stacy Cantor, 84, partner, Skadden Arps, Slate, Meager, and Flom. Nicole Middleton, 01, Senior Vice President, Membership, ASCAP. That's a big job. Colleen Pacone, 90, Associate Chief Counsel, New York, United States Customs and Border Protection. My personal pen pal, Susan Posen, class of 78, Chair, Zach Posen, and House of Z, LLC. Susan, all my fashion mistakes are my own, so I'm sorry about that. I'm on my own, all right. Dorsey Regal, 78, founding partner, Hogat, Newman, Regal, and Kenny. Jody Siegel Stein, 06, Vice President, Acquisitions and Development, the Lightstone Group. This is someone who's very familiar to this law school and to us, one of our favorites, Ann Swern, class of 80, prosecutor, public defender, and adjunct law professor at Brooklyn Law School. Bev Wilson, 12, Associate General Counsel, Director of Legal and Compliance, Plated. Hi, Bev. So I'm pleased to ask the chair of the Women's Leadership Circle, Debbie Epstein Henry, who's an internationally recognized expert, consultant, best-selling author, public speaker on careers, workplaces, women in law, winner of the Nobel Prize, broad jumps the Grand Canyon. Ask her to commence tonight's program. And after practicing as a litigator for a number of years, Debbie founded her own consulting firm, now known as, I said, DEH Consulting, Speaking, Writing, and she's the author of 2 American Bar Association best-selling books, Law and Reorder and Finding Bliss. Debbie is a co-founder of Bliss Lawyers, a company that employs high-caliber attorneys to work on temporary engagements for in-house and law firm clients. After the program, I hope you'll join us all for a reception in the space in the back there. And Debbie, why don't you take over right now? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for that generous introduction. Thank you to the law school for starting this initiative, which is really amazing, and I want to applaud the law school for this work in doing this. I want to recognize the women who are sitting right here. We together will be working on all of the great work that this Women's Leadership Network will do, and whether it's programming, networking, mentoring, all these great things. So I want to applaud this Women's Leadership Circle as well. The members of this circle are going to lead each of the conversations at each of these tables, so I want to encourage everybody to find your places at your seats at the tables, because you'll be leading those conversations, and I'll be giving instructions along those lines shortly. I also just want to take a moment, and in addition to recognizing Dean Allard, I want to acknowledge Caitlin Monk and Camille James, who are the 2-point people at this law school who are really making this initiative happen. So please raise your hands back there, Caitlin and Camille. And I see Professor Fullerton and Professor Kaflow, two former professors of mine. I wouldn't dare not recognize them. One other thing I'll say before we start is I just want to also acknowledge the law school for sharing those preliminary drinks. I always find an audience is so much more forgiving with a glass of wine. Very wise and very appreciative right here. So what I want to do is share some opening remarks of areas where I see lawyers stall, and I'll point out where I see women stalling in particular. That's just going to set the stage for some challenges that we'll be addressing. Then at each of your tables, you'll have a breakout conversation led by the women of the leadership circle, and then from there we'll reconvene as a larger group, do some reporting back, and then go to cocktails. It's going to be really very efficient, very productive, and I'm going to walk around, and part of the reason why I like to do that is because I'm really into shoes, and if I'm behind a podium, you don't see my shoes. And we can talk. The platforms make them much more comfortable than they look. And then the other thing is, it's accountability. I don't want to see iPhones or any of those things out. So anyway, let's go to work. We're going to talk about a pursuit of success. And when you think about success in the workplace, there's sort of two big buckets that we can think about. One is your individual action steps, what you as a lawyer can do to better your status every day. And the second piece is more broadly about the workplace and the profession and the market at large. For tonight's program, we're going to focus on what you can do personally, but I just want to acknowledge that that's just a piece of the puzzle, obviously. If you're leaning in as much as you possibly can, if your workplace is inhospitable to you, of course, there's only so far you can get. But tonight our focus is on what we personally can do. And I want to start with a personal story to really kind of capture what I want to focus on tonight. I was at a graduation at Lincoln Center about a decade ago, and there were thousands of people in the audience, and the dean had a tradition where each graduate stood on the stage, walked on the stage, handed the dean a little card with their name and any recognition they may have, and then proceeded to walk off the stage. The way it happened to be is the 5 summa cum laude grads were at the foot of the stage. And it just happened to be that the valedictorian that year was a woman, and the 4 other summa grads were men. And the way they collected, the valedictorian happened to be behind one of the male summa grads. And I saw him gesture to her, go ahead. Of course, she's the valedictorian, right? And she sort of shrugged, and he sort of shrugged, and he proceeded to be announced as the first graduate of the class. I was standing on stage because I was going to give another graduate award, and it's actually the greatest exercise of self-restraint that I didn't actually go strangle both the woman and the man. I am not incarcerated. That's how I'm here to tell that story. But for me, it was a real moment of that is what's going on our end. What could we do better here? That often as women, in particular, we think our actions should speak for ourselves. In that moment, she's the valedictorian, right? Everybody knows she's the best. But what I argue is that in today's competitive marketplace, it's a threshold issue that you're good. And in this case, she was the best. To me, what are the differentiators that make people thrive and those people who wither in the workplace? They're about these 5 things. Number 1, are you effective at developing sponsorship relationships and strategic alliances? Number 2, have you been able to raise your hand for leadership opportunities, and do you have executive presence? 3, are you able to self-promote without being that obnoxious self-promoter in the room? Part of it's an element of risk-taking. Are you able to do that and demonstrate your value? 4, are you able to network effectively? Are you able to make that ask that really is that last moment in that networking that really sort of secures the deal? And 5, can you manage all the time management and flexibility challenges that we all need to manage in our life to prioritize? With our limited time, we're not going to tackle all those. We're going to tackle those first 3 topics that are in orange and just kind of zero in on that. And thankfully, we'll be doing lots of programming and fun stuff through this Women's Leadership Network and hope to tackle those other conversations soon. So what I want to do is just briefly sketch out what those 3 groups are and then put you guys to work to brainstorm about it further. So first, by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with that term sponsorship? So there's a range of experience in the room. Some of you are students, some of you are long-term time practitioners. I want to briefly just give a little context. Maybe about a third of the hands went up. Sponsorship's different from mentoring. What's interesting about the research around mentoring is that women are actually quite good at developing mentoring relationships. But what the research has increasingly shown is there's not necessarily a causal relationship between effective mentoring relationships and increased promotion, increased compensation. So the question is, how is sponsorship different? There's a great piece that was done in the Harvard Business Review in 2011 that started really elucidating those differences. And what they found is that a sponsor, unlike a mentor, must be a power broker. It's not only somebody who's got tremendous influence, but it's somebody who's willing to use his or her influence to back somebody who is high potential. And that's the other piece of sponsorship that's different. It's not just anybody who can be a mentee. A sponsee is somebody who's high potential. If I'm a power broker, I'm only putting my name behind somebody who is of influence. So this notion of sponsorship is incredibly important in the workplace to be able to develop these strategic alliances for people to back you. What's interesting is that the research has also shown that often women are not understanding and appreciating the value of sponsorship as much as they may need to, and that unlike mentoring, you can't just artificially pair somebody. Again, if I'm powerful, I'm not going to put my name behind anybody and my reputation. I have to know that person is worth my backing. And so what's interesting is that we tend to sponsor people who look like us. So men are 46% more likely to be organically sponsored just by that senior guy who's willing to show that junior guy the way, and whites are 63% more likely. So you, as somebody who may want to be sponsored, or you want to sponsor somebody else, you have to think about those barriers and think about those inclinations. Just go to somebody who looks like you and think differently. On the subject of leadership, what I've seen most often with respect to women, and when I just want to pause for a second, I'm referencing some research. I'm summarizing here. I'm obviously drawing some generalizations. This is not all women. I ran a study in a partnership with Working Mother for a decade where we surveyed lawyers across the country and did this national survey. So my research is around that and some of the books I've written, et cetera. But what I've seen sometimes is more of an anxiety among women about a readiness for leadership. Maybe I'm going to wait to raise my hand, and I may lose that opportunity because I haven't completed everything in the job requirement and only 80%, but feel like, oh, if I raise my hand for this, I'm misrepresenting. So there's that's going on. Some women are worried about the time. They've got more demands at home. They don't want to necessarily take on that extra thing. Maybe they're getting on dead-end leadership tracks. I remember when I was a law firm lawyer, I was on the recruiting committee. That's what I cared about. I was like, I like to eat and I like to talk. This is perfect for me. If I wanted to be on that fast path to run the firm, maybe that wasn't going to be the powerful track. That's okay for me. That's not what I wanted. But sometimes we get on dead-end leadership tracks if we want that path to the top. And sometimes we're not as open about the process in terms of how to get to those leadership roles. I ran an event years ago. I had 3 very prominent general counsel on the panel, and each was asked, how'd you get to these roles? How did you find these places? And how did you get to this high level of power? And each sort of attributed to fortuity. And there's a lot more that's behind it, so we're not sharing all the secrets and all the tricks in how to get there. The other piece around leadership that's also been really heavily more researched by the Center for Talent Innovation is something called executive presence. A lot of times those leaders have that charisma, they have that presence, and you don't know how to define it. The research from the Center for Talent Innovation talks about executive presence in 3 respects. This notion of gravitas, really having credibility and vision and the real substance behind having that leadership role. They also talk about communication and how important it is to be able to know your audience and read your audience and communicate effectively. the research actually also showed that appearance is important, not in terms of attractiveness as much as professionalism. So that is a component of executive presence that we're going to explore as well. The last thing I want to touch on is this notion around self-promotion, and again, setting the stage for some ideas about how we can do these things better. I'll share another story along these lines. I have 3 sons, and when my middle son was in kindergarten, the teacher had this wonderful tradition where she had a question of the day, and each morning you dropped off and you saw the question. At the end of the day, all the kids' answers were listed. And one morning I dropped off, and the question of the day was, what does your mom do? I have these 3 sons. I've always talked to them about my work and advocacy on women and all this. I was so excited for the answer to this question. So when I picked up, and the laughter indicates just what you think. So I picked up at the end of the day, and there were all of these impressive moms, and I went down the list and read everything. It was in alphabetical order, so Spence was at the very bottom, my middle son. Doctors, lawyers, financial expert, blah, blah, blah. And at the bottom it said, my mom makes my lunch. That's what Spence said about me. Here he is, right here, dreaming about the lunch. Now, I am quite good at lunch, but this was a low point for me as a mother. And I called my sister pretty much in tears, saying, like, I clearly am failing on both ends. Like, you know, my son is like, doesn't even know what I do, and it's a disaster. So my sister, being the good sister that she is, says, no, this is all good. She's like, he's 5. What does he like the most? Lunch. You're meeting his needs. It's all good. So again, I took it because the alternative was not going to be so great. I share this story because I think this is most of what we worry about on the issue of self-promotion. Everybody's going to know it's all about me, and I'm being that obnoxious self-promoter who we all know in the workplace and our families, et cetera. And so that's really the tension, is how do I demonstrate my value without being so transparent like Spence? In surveying lawyers about their fears around self-promotion, these are the answers that I've typically gotten. They don't want to be obvious or aggressive. They don't want to be perceived as bragging. They are worried about not being liked. They don't want to impose on others in terms of self-promotion efforts. They don't know how to navigate the internal politics. They're sort of self-critical anyway, not really thinking they're worthy. And then most critically, they think their accomplishments should speak for themselves. That's the valedictorian. Not self-promoting there, but she can't even take credit where credit is due. So the risk piece associated with self-promotion is, well, I don't want to put myself out there. I'm fearful of failing. I'm fearful of being rejected. Or I don't have the confidence. I don't have the knowledge, so I don't want to put myself out there like that. So I just sort of unloaded a bunch of negative things. Now, you heard in my introduction that I co-own a company called Bliss Lawyers, so it'd be super mean of me to just leave you here. But I'm not going to. I think the stage setting of what the research is and what the issues are just in this little sphere is important for the next thing that we're going to do now, which is putting you guys to work. There are these 3 topics I just kind of introduced and touched on. At each of your tables, one of these 3 topics is listed. And what I'd like you to do now is, with your member of the leadership circle, you're going to brainstorm for the next 15 minutes about what we can do to address these challenges. So for example, if you're at the leadership table, Dorsey is going to start this discussion by saying, you know, on the subject, I was, let's say, afraid of raising my hand for leadership, but I all of a sudden had a really great opportunity to do it. This is how I did it. And she's going to share a success story and maybe a challenge that she had and how she overcame it and was then successful in leadership. She's going to be jotting down that idea. She's going to share that with her group first, and then she'll facilitate a conversation among all of you about how you've navigated developing skills in leadership and executive presence. And we're going to do the same thing at the 2 other topic tables. So at the self-promotion table, again, Jody's going to start, and she's going to share an example of how maybe she was uncomfortable self-promoting, but then there was an opportunity for her to do it effectively. This is how she did it, and she'll facilitate the conversation around how she's effectively self-promoted or taken a risk or been uncomfortable about doing that, and then she was enabled to do it, and she'll share those stories. At the sponsorship discussion, that's the 3rd subject we'll be discussing. Again, Mika's going to start out and talk about perhaps a sponsorship relationship she's been effectively able to develop, or maybe a challenge she's had in developing strategic alliances, maybe how she's overcome it, and then again, she'll facilitate a conversation around sponsorship and strategic alliances. All of those conversations are going to happen over the course of the next 15 minutes. Then we'll reconvene as a larger group in our last 30 minutes, and each of the tables is going to share one big idea that came out of their discussion around self-promotion or sponsorship or executive presence. So we're going to, if you're not at the executive presence table, you'll have some opportunity to learn some of the other ideas. I'll also intersperse my recommendations while the other tables are reporting back. So with those instructions, is everybody okay? Any questions before we get going? Thankfully, the Women of Leadership Circle representatives know this, know the drill, so we should be in good shape. But any questions? Okay, go to work. Thank you. Hi, if I can get everybody's attention. Okay, everybody. I've heard some wonderful conversations. And what we're going to do now, if I could get everybody's attention, please, is I want to start hearing what was discussed at the various tables. So I see sponsorships here. And where are the other sponsorship tables? 1, 2, is it just these 3? Is that right? Okay. Who is leading the discussion over here? Okay. Do you want to start? And actually, do we have a mic? That'd be great. Yeah. So what I want to just do, just to recap, the leadership circle member from each table is just going to give sort of the big idea of what they came up with regard to sponsorship, and then we'll hear from the other table. So I just want, if everyone could just briefly summarize, that would be great.
I think we talked more about the fact that maybe we're not aware that we need to look for strategic partnerships or sponsors early on in our careers, and being more strategic and deliberate about it, and the power that the sponsor does have, years later in your career. So I think it's maybe being more conscious and aware and differentiating between a sponsor and a mentor. Is that accurate?
That's great. And Anne-Marie, do you just want to just say your name and affiliation? Just I want to make sure people get to know people in the leadership circle.
Anne-Marie Bowler. I have a law firm, Gabay, Raffi & Bowler, with actually another BLS alum, Sari Gabay Raffi, from 2000, and we do litigation and transactional work.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay. Oh, Nicole again, just start with an introduction.
Hi, Nicole George Middleton, Senior Vice President of Membership for ASCAP. I guess we talked about the challenge of actually finding a sponsor. Like, how do you find someone, or, to sort of like want to advocate for you, to want to put themselves out for you? You might want that person to do that, but how do you get them to want to do it for you?
Right. So I want to give a story along those lines that I think is really powerful. I did an event on sponsorship years ago with Julie Sweet, who was then General Counsel of Accenture. And she told this story that she was a junior associate at Cravath, and there was a senior partner who was doing incredible work that she really wanted to learn and have access to this partner. And so she went into his office one day and said, hey, I know you're super busy and you probably don't have time for me as a junior associate, but I bet you need some help with some of the work on your desk. And any article you're offered to write that you don't have time to write, if I could write the first draft, that would be great. Any speech you're offered to give, can I do the first draft? Any brief you don't have time to deal with, can I do the first draft? Well, she was a superstar. So that's the exact nature of the sponsorship. What senior partner wouldn't want a superstar to say, I'll do every piece of work on your desk you don't want to deal with? That is a really powerful story, because as a junior person, you often think like, what do I have to offer here? But the truth is that senior people need those trustworthy people in their back pocket to make them look good. So that synergy of being able to offer value as a high potential person is the way to get there. Mika?
Hi, I'm Mika Bonti. I'm SVP of Legal Affairs at HBO. And unfortunately, I talked too much, so I didn't get to hear what other people said. But, one of the things that I think when I think about sponsorship is the reality is a lot of the most important decisions about you happen when you're not in the room. And so if it's happening when you're not in the room, you better make sure there are people in the room that are advocating for you. So anyway, we ended up talking about different sorts of relationships and different types of sponsors. And for me, at HBO, I've been there for 13 years. I've been doing sort of the same sort of work for many years. So the people that I know who are my sponsors, I have a relationship with, and I've been with them for many years. Some of the other lawyers here work at law firms or insurance defense firms or other places where their relationship with their client is transactional. They're on one case together, then goes away, they're on another case together, or maybe they're never on a case together again. So we were sort of talking about how do you ask for sponsorship? So for me, in the relationship-driven kind of transactions that I have with my clients, it happened organically because I was going to be there, and so it helped him if I were moving up because I help him do his deals, right? So that sort of worked. It was an organic kind of sponsorship. But in some of the other situations, you have a client, you work on something with them, and then you sort of have to ask because otherwise then they're gone, and then there's really no continuing relationship. So we talked a little bit about how some of the people here feel like they have to ask every time they have an interaction with a client, and sort of how uncomfortable that can be.
Absolutely, and I think it's a bunch of really good points, and something I want to underscore is actually it's important to ideally have at least 2 sponsors in your career. Often in the examples that Mika provided, she had a sponsor in her workplace, 1 or more. You want to ideally also have at least 1 sponsor outside of your workplace, because inevitably if you want to make a transition, that person within your workplace may be self-interested, and if Mika's doing a great job at HBO, her senior boss may not want her to leave, and may not, even if it may be in her best interest, let's say, one day to leave. So that notion of having sponsors both within and outside of your workplace is really important. I just want to make sure, you guys, I see sponsorship on your table. Does anybody want to speak up on that?
I do want to congratulate you. Being a mother and making breakfast is a okay, that was my first. Think of the other kids whose parents or mothers have the nanny meeting.
Right.
It's on. That's a pattern.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, maybe now that they're older, they wouldn't say breakfast is so good, but that's another problem. I just want to add a couple other quick things. I think that actually transition points are really important for times for sponsorship. Those are the times when you really need people to back you more than ever. One of the most important values that a sponsor actually can bring is real feedback. Again, with women and people of color, the issue around real feedback is really a problem. So if you have a sponsor who actually isn't so invested in your career that they'll tell you, yeah, generally you're good here, but this is an area you have to work on, that's a really valuable thing for somebody powerful who cares enough to tell you that. But don't just wait for that person to do it to you, do it for you. You want to make sure you push on that. So you may get an annual review from somebody very powerful who has a lot of influence over your career, and they give you accolades. You should say, you know what, I'm so glad that this year was a good one. If I could work on one thing this year, what would it be? So you take ownership of your career and make sure you solicit that feedback. So I want to move on to the subject of leadership and executive presence. Is that one of this table right here? And again, turn to, here you go. And here, just again, one big idea that you think would be really valuable for the table, for the audience to hear.
I think if there was one takeaway from our discussion, it would be there was a repeated theme. We talked about gravitas, communication, appearance. There was a repeated theme that a person who has, I work in law enforcement, so we call it a command presence, but it's an executive presence. They make you feel, when you are talking to them, that they are fully engaged and that they know something about you. And we talked about sticky brain. We have somebody here who's from a political background as well. So you could have your staff do that, or you yourself could come up with methods somebody mentioned in terms of, when you meet somebody, putting on the back of the business card a couple things they told you before you forget it. And then if you're going to talk to them again, you remind yourself about that. But it really, the connection, somebody who can connect with
Making
people.
it personal, absolutely. Yeah. Colleen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so I'm Colleen Piccone. I work for United States Customs and Border Protection. It's the largest law enforcement agency in the United States, and I cover Northeast legal issues, everything. So we say bugs, drugs, and thugs, anything crossing the border illegally.
That sounds really scary, actually. So we're going to move on. Dorsey, would you introduce yourself and share your thoughts?
I'm Dorsey Regal. I am a founding partner of
Just
Hoge
speak into the
Newman.
mic. I just want to make sure everybody hears you. Sorry.
Founding partner of Hoge Newman, Regal & Kenny. It's a women-owned law firm, 22 lawyers. We do litigation, and we're in our 22nd year, so we're doing great. Our topic was leadership and executive presence. With leadership, I think what comes across most from our discussion is that it takes a decision on our parts to take some kind of action. We had Jillian talked about speaking up at work and essentially, not allowing non-recognition, not taking any guff. Her new boss said something called her Lillian, but her name is Jillian, so she didn't, there is a possibility where people could go, I'm just not going to say anything, but she didn't. She spoke up, and obviously, that was noticed and is good. She also mentioned that at her job at J.P. Morgan, they provide executive coaches, and that is very helpful in working on leadership and leadership skills and getting your work done and advancing. So obviously that's a great employer in terms of promoting leadership. We also had the thought that it's important to take some initiative and that you really need to decide what it is that you want to do, what you think is most important to do, and then take some initiative to try to make that happen. Our more recent graduates are really just starting out and are really at the point where they're thinking, what can I do? You need some executive coaching, and you need to attend sessions like this. On the executive presence, we didn't get a chance to get to that, but I would just like to make a big pitch for statement jewelry and concealer.
Wait, in that order or which order?
Probably concealer first.
Okay, I would agree on that. Bev?
Hi, I'm Bev Wilson. I'm the Associate General Counsel at Plated, which is a food tech company. We had a great discussion, and just to continue on the point of initiative, I think a lot of lawyers are often or step into leadership positions early on in their career, particularly if they're in a non-traditional job. So I think that was a theme at our table, and it was really interesting to hear how people tackled those challenges, often managing people with more experience than they have as a young attorney. So really fascinating how they rose to the challenge and tackled those issues.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I think this is the last leadership table. Is that right? Okay. Stacy, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Stacy Cantor. I'm a partner at Skadden Arps, and I head our capital markets and corporate finance practice. So we talked about, we didn't really get to executive presence, but we spoke about leadership, and we did touch on initiative. And one of the things that we said is important is to try to identify a need that's not being filled. That's one way to ascend to a leadership position. Identify a need. It could be a substantive need, some kind of subject matter where somebody with expertise is necessary, or it could be sort of a function that's just not being done. In my case and in somebody else's case, it was sort of work of a practice management nature that really needed to be done. In my case, I put my hand up and said, I'll take on those responsibilities. And ultimately, I was recognized, made co-practice leader, and then practice leader. Now, there was, of course, a risk that I was going to wind up in one of those dead-end leadership areas. So that is something to watch. One of the more junior people, one of the more recent graduates said, okay, but how do I translate that to somebody who's more junior? In our case, we were talking about a firm. And so we talked about assuming a leadership role on whatever your assignments are, whether they be deals or cases, speaking to senior people about how you can make the deal or the case go forward. When one of those group emails comes, to just something generally needs to be done, and it could be a big black hole, put up your hand. Go to the partner or go to whoever your superior is, whoever you're working for, and just say, I see that such and such has to get done. What can I do to help? And that way, you're going to demonstrate that you are a leader.
Those are really great suggestions. And I just want to underscore, the point you were making about somebody who's maybe more junior. is the advantage of being junior often is you can be a point person. If you're visible, you can be a resource to people. Even if you don't have the ultimate expertise, if you're visible and known to people, you actually can have a lot of power in directing attention to what may be something that somebody needs. Just want to highlight a few other things that I've seen come up with other lawyers in terms of leadership. People like to talk about themselves. And so if you see somebody who's really somebody you admire as a leader, male or female, hey, say, hey, can I grab a coffee with you? Can we have lunch or something like that? I just love, I'm so admiring of your career path. Can I just pick your brain about how you've been able to navigate your trajectory? Usually if you invite somebody like that to coffee, they'll actually may be insulted if you don't invite them to lunch because they want the opportunity to talk more. So you want to really actually access people who are exemplary of what you want. Sometimes I see leaders step up more when they realize that they can provide service and give back. Maybe leadership gives somebody a platform. So if you're a little shy about taking that role, it can often benefit you, and you can use that platform to benefit other people. The other thing I wanted to say, for those of you who have a lot of time constraints outside of work, something I'd recommend is if you get an opportunity to lead, don't automatically decline it if you think you don't have the time. Maybe you can reframe that assignment. Maybe somebody wants you to lead a new committee and you can say, I'd love to do it. I'd love to also do it with this other person. And then you do shared leadership. And so then you still get the experience, you still get the exposure, but you're sharing the work. So when you're invited to have an opportunity, don't just have that knee-jerk reaction of declining it. Think about whether you could reframe it in such a way that it serves you better. I just want to touch on also a couple of points around executive presence. As I mentioned, the research for the Center of Talent Innovation talks about 3 components of executive presence. The first is gravitas. And as I mentioned before, the indicators of that are things like confidence and decisiveness and integrity and reputation, emotional intelligence, vision. Those are things we've all seen in prominent leaders. And the question is, how do you get there? Where I've seen people develop these skills more effectively, part of it is just practice, being over-prepared. When you're confident going into that meeting, when you've thought through the issues more readily, then it's less likely that you're going to be tripped up because you have gone through that exercise of being so prepared that you're anticipating questions better than that person could potentially pose them. Anticipating next steps, as I said, also enlisting sponsors. If you've got somebody senior who's supportive of you, that can really help in giving you that confidence to project that gravitas that you may need. The second piece of it is communication. One thing I want to really emphasize is this notion of reading your audience. And it actually, Colleen, the comment that you made about sort of remembering these things about people, you got to make it personal with people. So when you understand who your audience is, then you can be more effective at relating to them. As you've seen, I'm sure by now, in doing public speaking, I tell stories. The reason why is because I think that if a story is relatable to you, you're more likely to remember it and then hopefully take it back with you and apply it in your own life. And so I'll share another story along these lines, again about Spencer, is when he was, and you'll see if you have like 3 kids, I never attributed much to birth order until I have 3 kids now. I'm like, it's all about the middle child. But anyway, at 11 years old, he was developing a PowerPoint of the Hanukkah gifts he wanted. So that was a whole other issue. But in any case, for years, my kids had been wanting Xbox. They were convinced they were the only family of kids in the suburbs of Philadelphia who didn't have Xbox. And I just, repeatedly said, there's no basis to get this. I don't care that you're the only kids in the suburbs, blah, blah, blah. They tried everything. They were like, it's great for hand-eye coordination and everything else. So then one year in the PowerPoint, like I said, there was a screen that showed, the kids playing Xbox, and in the corner was a picture of my husband and I toasting with a glass of wine. And he said, if you get the Xbox, then you and Dad are going to have much more time together, and it's all going to be good. Done. We got the Xbox. He knew his audience. I couldn't care less. I knew that the whole thing about hand-eye was ridiculous, but he actually was like, I know how to reach my mother. So that notion of reading your audience, don't underestimate it. That's what it's about. It's about connecting with people and ideally meeting their needs. Also, this notion of commanding a room, there are ways to get more confident about that. And I'm not saying about doing public speaking. I'm talking about leading a meeting. Maybe there's 3 people, but being comfortable leading that meeting. So maybe it's about showing up early and previewing the menu, the venue. Or maybe it's about preparing the agenda and sort of controlling the agenda and doing that. But all that sort of preparatory work are what's going to give you the confidence. This last piece, of appearance, again, this is, among the research, it's the least important factor, but this notion of projecting some level of professionalism, unfortunately, is part of how we're evaluated. So I want to move to the last topic around self-promotion and risk-taking, and hear from, Denise, yes.
Hi. I'm Denise Faltashek. I'm the Executive Vice President and General Counsel of the Hanes Celestial Group. We're a leading natural and organic food and beverage company, and personal care, I should add. So we covered the topic of self-promotion and risk. The table here, generally most people were fairly new to the practice of law, only out of several years. And what they talked about in terms of self-promotion was there was an element of self-doubt and lack of confidence where, being junior, they felt that there were more senior lawyers in the room who might have who might actually have a better perspective, better experience. And we talked about the fact that, and Caitlin, you brought up the fact that sometimes you hedge the answer to a question where you might say, this might be a good way to handle this, but I don't, really know. So there's that sort of hedge, which we identified that, really we should, when we're actually promoting ourselves and we're actually giving our answers, we should not have that hedge. The other thing we talked about was Lori had an experience where we talked about taking risk and putting yourself out there, so the risk part of it. And what Lori said was that she was really very unhappy at her job, and what she wanted to do, this was not where I want to be, and she saw a job ad for general counsel. And she wasn't sure what it was, but she said, I'm going to take a risk. I'm really unhappy here. And so I'm going to take my chance. I'm going to go for it. She went for it. She got the job. And her mentor actually saw the exact same ad and didn't take the risk. And so is not a general counsel today because she did not take the risk. So one of the things is, what's the worst thing that can happen when you put yourself out there? You don't get the job. And so what's so horrible about that?
Right.
So that was our big idea.
That's great, and I think, and you're the one who did this, right? I mean, I think what the story shows is sometimes the risk of inaction is greater than the actual risk itself, and that often is what propels people to have the confidence to finally take that risk. Wait, do you guys, I forgot, you guys are self-promotion, sorry about that. Okay, great.
Hi, I'm Jody Siegelstein. I am Vice President at Lightstone Group, which is a real estate development company, and I work in acquisitions and development. So one of the things we started with, which is something that our male counterparts don't seem to have a problem doing, is fake it till you make it, except we probably aren't faking as much as they are. But so how do you do that, right? So there's many ways you can do it. You can do it verbally, but we talked about different ways other than speaking, which is, I think, one of the best things that was said, which was said by Sheila, and we kind of all expanded on it, was taking a seat at the table. You have to take a seat at the table. You can't sit on the side. You have to take a seat, and you have to show your power and show that you're part of a team or you're a leader. And I think that in and of itself is a very powerful statement.
Absolutely. Terrific points. Anne.
Thank you. I'm Ann Swern. I was a prosecutor, public defender. I am the district leader of the 52nd Assembly District, where you're sitting right now, and most recently I was a candidate for Brooklyn DA. And so we actually asked each other about the challenges that they have faced today about self-promotion, and what came up consistently was internally in a large organization trying to seek a new job and how to do that. And the story that was told was somebody who went on an interview and perceived her weaknesses in the prior place and where she wanted to go next, and what the new interview would be like, and whether or not the new boss would speak to the old boss. And was there risk inherent in it? Would the old boss be upset that she did that, and then her future path if she didn't get the new job, and how would it work within the entire place? But taking the risk, and what to say. And it was interesting because in telling the story, the person never said, she sought the job. We didn't know whether the bureau chief had asked her to come work there or she sought the job. And it was in fact that she sought the job. And what it also was that she met the boss when they were working not on a case together, but he was around the bureau. And she made it her business to know the boss. These were really great things that she had done that she never told the table and that she never really expressed, which would have been self-promotion, and we don't even realize it. But what we talked about, the antidote to that sometimes, and the self-doubt, is having a network of support where you can test yourself with other people. Do you have these communication issues with your boss? Or does my boss do this exactly with you in every other case we have?
Right.
And so that you test whether or not you are realistic in your appraisal of yourself or you're hypercritical.
Right, those are really great ideas, and one thing I want to underscore is this notion of supporting others, through your self-promotion. I call it a promotion buddy, and the idea is if you have a colleague who is doing great things and they're not in the room and there's an opportunity to recommend somebody for that next project, for you to be able to say, oh, I know that Sue is the person who has to do this. She's, if we don't give that project to her, I don't know who we'd give it to. And then meanwhile, Sue's in another meeting and she can say the same thing about Anne. If you have that relationship where you can back somebody and you know they're worthy of that praise, that's a really valuable way to self-promote. Susan?
Yes. I'm Susan Posen. I spent 22 years at Strickland Levan. I was a corporate partner doing M&A work, and then I fell down a fashion rabbit hole and helped my son Zach Posen start his business, and I'm chairman of the board currently. I fear I spoke too much and the time flew away. But
Susan, just speak a little closer to the mic. I want to make sure everybody hears you.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'd like to share, some of the things that I was saying that I think, is for the broader group. And in terms of self-promotion, I think it's very important for everybody to keep track of what you're doing. Keep a diary of your deals, the monetary value of those deals. First of all, it gives you confidence. You look back after a year or two of practice and you say, hey, I've done all of this. It means something and I own it. And then later on, it's a validation of your self-worth, and you can say, look, I've been responsible for this many deals, it's touched this many dollars, and that's what people care about in law as a business, so you might as well, really keep a tally on that. And it, I think, adds gravitas. The other thing I saw in my practice was that, and made a mistake on, was I stayed inside the corporate bubble that I was in for many, many years. I had raised 2 children at the same time as practicing law, and I felt I didn't have time to do the community work I would have liked to have done. And I think, law firms are kind of paternalistic, and you think that the whole world is internally there, but it's really not. And you should be, doing other things. It will give you confidence and help you find other opportunities when the time comes as well. And then the last thing is everybody needs a coach. And I think, it could be somebody internally who supports you. It could be a friend or somebody who, you can say, hey, I'm stuck here. How can I develop myself better? What do you think? How do I look? Whatever the issues are, or somebody who can really say, hey, you better do some professional writing. You've got to get out there and become known. So those are the sorts of things I think, help with self-promotion. Risk we didn't get to.
Okay, I just wanted to, those are great ideas. I want to touch on a few more things that sort of underscore that. I just want to start with a quote from Claire Shipman, who, if you haven't read her co-authored book, The Confidence Code, I think it's quite compelling. The key finding in the book is this: success, it turns out, correlates just as closely with confidence as it does with competence. Again, coming back to the valedictorian, she thought it was all about competence, but half of how you're evaluated in the workplace is on your projected confidence. So if you think this stuff is fluff, there's a lot more to it. And so a few more tips I want to suggest. Some were already addressed. I just want to highlight a few things. One of the most effective self-promotion techniques I've seen is align your own self-promotion for the benefit of your employer, and I'll give you an example. I did an event years ago with this woman who was a law firm partner, And she got tremendous accolades from general counsel clients the next day from the event. And she forwarded one of the accolades to me anonymously and said, I don't know what to do. I want to send this to my managing partner who was there the preceding night and say, look how exciting this is and how successful her event was. But she's like, I don't want to be that obnoxious person who's forwarding that email. So I said, give me a little bit more context. And she told me this was a client they'd been doing a ton of environmental work for years. They had tried to grow the relationship and do more of their more lucrative corporate work. No success. So I said, well, what about forwarding that email and instead of saying FYI, say, sounds like Jim loved last night's event. Maybe now's the time to take him to dinner and really pitch him on the larger relationship. That's what she did. That's what happened. That same email from the managing partner that the managing partner got to see of saying, hey, isn't Heidi great? It was done to align her interests with the best interests of that law firm. And the impact of that one email was much more than it ever could have been on its own. So that's really important. The other thing I want to underscore here is benefit others and credit others through your own self-promotion. So if Stacy's leading the capital markets group, for her to be able to have this huge success in her group and be at a meeting and say, I just want to acknowledge my team here who's done an amazing job. I'm sure they did do an amazing job, but you know what? Who's the leader of that team? That's a great way for Stacy to have her own recognition for leading that successful result. Those are the things, being thoughtful about other people, are going to be really helpful in self-promotion. On the taking of risks, there's a lot of ideas here. I just want to mention a couple of things that I think are really important. This issue of the risk of inaction, to me, is really compelling. Some of the research has shown, actually, if you push yourself in physical risks, sometimes that's something that actually can inspire you. So when we went to Costa Rica, and my dad, who was 80 at the time, jumped off the side of this really high area into this rapid, basically, and I was a wimp and afraid to go in. Finally, I said, I'm going to do this too, after he jumped in. That was a moment of inspiration for me and gave me more confidence to take some other risks. And the research shows that. So if you can push yourself in some other context, it can often empower you in other contexts. I think the other thing that's important here is that it's uncomfortable, that you're never going to know 100% if that risk is right. You're also never going to reach the true successes in your career unless you're willing to put yourself out there in some respects. So there's a lot more on risk on this. I'll just say that all of this stuff, there's articles on my site you can download for free. I'm happy for you to do that because there's so much more content for us to cover. But there's nothing between me and that cocktail reception. I don't want to be standing between your glass of wine. So I'm going to leave you with one parting story because I think it's really exemplary of the whole message of tonight. So when I was 4 years old, we belonged to this swim club, and they had a tradition for the kids who were not able to swim yet. They had a peanut race, and all the 3- and 4-year-old kids collected at the steps on the pool, and there were all these peanuts strewn on the steps of the pool. And in an allotted period of time, the kids were instructed to collect as many peanuts as possible. So time started, and I was scouring the steps to collect as many peanuts as possible. And if you're a 4-year-old girl, your hands are not that big, you can't really collect that many peanuts. And so I was really frustrated because the time was still ticking. There was more time to collect, and there were no more room in my hands for those peanuts. But I was wearing a Danskin bathing suit, which for those of you who are old enough in the room to know, it was the precursor to spandex, essentially. So I started stuffing the peanuts down my bathing suit. Time was called. The children were directed to their towels to count up their peanuts. I stood over my towel and unfurled my bathing suit, and all of the peanuts fell, and I won the peanut race. I share this story because it's all about what we've discussed tonight. It's about pushing yourself. It's about not asking for permission. And it's about not being afraid to have the confidence and the will and the initiative to put yourself out there and try and go for it. And you're going to fail at some things, and you're going to have enormous success at others. And you're going to grow regardless, and you're going to live a fulfilled life. So with that, I want to thank you for listening. I want to wish you great success in your own peanut race, and I look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.